welcome to Informed Dissent. We have a little bit of a skeleton crew today. I'm here with Lisa Sellen Davis, who is an author writing a book about gender, and she is also a needle filter. And Corey Cohn, the disenchanted transsexual, and I'm Eliza Mondegreen. I'm a freelance writer, and I'm also writing a book about gender because that's just the thing to do these days. So Ben and Jamie are out today. We hope that they'll be back next week. And we wanted to do a few quick news items and then dig into the Supreme Court case about schools and books and can parents opt out.
Okay, so I'll read a couple of things that I thought were really important, and we'll link to them in the show notes. The first was that Attorney General Pam Bondi has released a memo that will include, among other things, the directive to investigate those who continue to provide gender-affirming care to minors. This is not my favorite way of handling the situation, but that's part of what's happening.
Yeah, it looks like she's going to try to use legislation that exists to prevent female genital mutilation, and that they would be looking at, and this seems like a much more fruitful avenue, they would be looking at insurance fraud. So especially Medicaid claims that had been, giving kids with trans identities endocrine conditions not otherwise specified, for example, or claiming they have precocious puberty when they want to go on puberty blockers when they're 12.
Well, that makes it sound much more reasonable.
Well, that part seems like, yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
The first part, I'm like, yeah, I don't know how that's gonna work.
We should get all the data, and we should figure out who's been transitioned with what diagnoses and how it all went. Although shutting down studies does not necessarily lead to that. And I don't know how much female genital mutilation there is of minors, especially because if you recall, in the World Professional Association for Transgender Health's 8th Standards of Care, which some people pretend to use as to create guidelines for children, the one surgery that remained as recommended for over 18 was phalloplasty, if I recall.
Yeah.
Creation of a
unlike the vaginoplasty,
is
designed to be done before a kid goes off to college so that mom and dad can remind him to take care of himself.
Just mom.
Yeah.
So we'll link to that, and I'm going to scrutinize that further. Over the weekend, the Times published a more than 10,000 word piece about the trans-identified San Jose State volleyball player Blair Fleming, which was deeply biased toward Fleming's experience. And there was, if you kept reading for thousands of words, you would learn something about the girls on the team, but just enough to dismiss them. But inside that story was a bit of news that Joanna Harper, the trans runner who's done a lot of research about male advantage, mostly to discount it, but sometimes admits that some is retained. It says, Harper is currently helping to lead an ambitious study of trans adolescents that measures their results in a 10-step fitness test before they start hormone therapy and then after, every 6 months for 5 years. And she or he continued that the study was not going to be impacted by the cuts to the National Institutes of Health because it has been funded by Nike.
Okay.
And so there are some people wondering about Nike. And I actually just saw right before we got on that there was a little bit more of a response from Nike, but I don't think it's saying much.
Well, is it better that Nike fund it than the taxpayers fund it?
Yeah. What would Nike do with that? Yes, it is. But what would Nike do? Would they be making special trans shoes?
Performance depressing shoes. That doesn't seem like the Nike brand.
I love I think I wear performance depressing shoes when I go running. That explains why I'm in the slow group at Ladies of Run Club. Other news. A doctor, oh, I can't remember. I didn't write down where he was. Alan Josephson, who was, I don't know if he was fired, but he was canceled in so many different ways, intimidated, removed from certain positions, and really targeted by his colleagues for speaking on a Heritage Foundation panel in 2017, which of course is the year that a bunch of lesbians and feminists also started speaking at the Heritage Foundation, speaking out about gender affirming care. And one of the things he said is, of course you affirm the child and love the child, but you don't affirm a bad idea. And after his career was destroyed, he just last week, I guess this week, he won a settlement of $1.6 million. So guess we
Is
should.
that a lot nowadays?
I take it.
Right. I'm like, somebody can destroy my career. It's not worth
Yeah.
it.
My career was destroyed and I got nothing. All I got was this lousy podcast.
Yeah.
But that is a sign of some kind of tide turning. So let's see, lots going on about trans athletes. Washington State vows to defy the Trump administration and allow boys and girls sports, and Trump administration is suing Maine for not complying. Though we keep hearing there are only 2 trans athletes in the state. I don't know if that's true or not. And then the other big news that we are going to discuss and its implications is the Mahmoud versus Taylor case, that came before the Supreme Court this year. And I looked on Ground News, which is a really fun site if you are a news nerd. Joining us is Bodie Bondi Burlap. What's his name?
Sorry, I thought you were saying that he was joining us.
No.
No, okay.
I'm just saying that Eliza's beautiful cat, for those listening, arrived. I love the cat. Okay, back to Mahmoud versus Taylor. What I was saying is that Ground News shows you who's covering the stories and who is ignoring them, which liberal and conservative and centrist media. And mostly they mark local media as centrist media. So even the local NPR stations will be cast as centrist as opposed to national NPR, which of course is far left. But this case has been pretty equally covered in liberal, centrist, and right-wing media, which I just find interesting. And it started because in 2022, Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland added LGBTQ inclusive books, including Uncle Bobby's Wedding, about getting gay married, Fried Puppy, about an ABC book about a puppy getting lost during a pride parade, Love Violet, about a girl with a crush on another girl, My Rainbow, about a trans girl who, of course, wants to have long hair because that's how you express being a girl. And they actually pulled My Rainbow and Pride Puppy from the book list before this went to trial, but people are talking a lot about Pride Puppy. Anyway, some parents did not like that they were integrated into the curriculum and requested to opt out based on religious objections. And initially they were told they were. But so many people opted out that they changed the policy and said you can't opt out because it was disruptive to have this many people opt out. And I don't know why people opted out, but they did report the school district reported that the opt-outs were not based on religion. So it would be really interesting to hear what they were actually for. And now the question before them is, should you be allowed to opt out of these books?
Mhm.
In the court of informed dissent, what do you guys say?
Court.
Well, I don't know. I have if I get started here, I'm going to start just attacking the entire premise of public education.
Oh.
So I want to dip my toe in before I leap in both feet.
You mean you're going to get all libertarian on us and
Well,
deride government schools?
Not merely libertarian, but all right. Why don't we stick with the context really quick, and then maybe we'll expand out and start instead of starting from the attacking the foundations here.
Well, what is appropriate, do you two think, for children to learn about gender and sexuality? When you look at, for instance, Pride Puppy, and you look at what they're showing in the Pride Parade, which is not, I mean, I have gone to Pride parades with my kids and kind of been like, oh, there is some hardcore kink stuff going on here that I didn't realize I was bringing my children to. That's not so represented in the pictures in the book. It's more, there are characters wearing out and proud t-shirts. Q for Queen is, one of the letters. R is for, Q for Queen in a beautiful dress. R is for rainbows, and they have signs like love knows no gender and peers and queers.
Yeah.
Sorry, it seemed like you were going to say something else.
It's funny when I looked at the books being banned, they didn't bother me that much because I think it's okay to have robust offerings in a library. At the same time, I think it's perfectly reasonable to decide that certain books aren't worth including, and that is part of what a librarian should and could do. When I've looked at the most banned books in America, for instance, and I'm not talking about, as I said to you guys, I'm always think it's ironic, funny, sad that To Kill a Mockingbird is one of the most banned books because of its white, quote unquote, white savior narrative, and that the left has plenty of book banning that they don't cop to, that because they're not doing it in the name of conservative religion, they're doing it in the name of equity, but it's the same thing. But when I look at I Am Jazz, for instance, I find it does not include messages that I want to read to children. It teaches that liking pink and mermaids makes you a girl, and that to be transgender is to have a girl brain and a boy body, which I object to the pink brain and blue brain complete dichotomy. But lots of people don't. And the book ends with Jazz like being her true self. But if you continued on and followed the story of Jazz Jennings, the puberty blocker made Jazz's penis too small, made the surgery really difficult. There were 3 surgeries. Doctors were arguing over the operating table. There wasn't enough penile, tissue to work with. Jazz is infertile and has no sexual function.
That would make a good children's book.
I mean, that's not in the book. That's my problem.
Like very educational. Yeah, it's when it crosses the line from something like representation to something like indoctrination into pseudoscience and like putting kids on a trajectory where like they could end up being lifelong medical patients. They could be really like you're introducing the idea that it's possible for your brain to be in the wrong body, and that's just a very consequential idea to teach kids. And it wasn't, I mean, my understanding of the case, it's not like banning books from the library, but it was books that were going to be used in the curricula, and the parents just wanted to opt their kids out. And that seems like a much higher kind of, sorry, not a much higher bar. That seems like a much more substantial concern than something's just in the library. And that there had been maybe a little bit of, could we call it bad faith from the school district to kind of classify them as, it's English books, so you can't opt out, rather than they're books about sexuality where parents have that option. Like I can definitely see how that was kind of breaking trust with families and not maybe the right thing to do. But I guess when I think about like the I Am Jazz book, it's like, would we read a book to kids in the classroom that was like, why auditing helped me find my true self and you should join Scientology? Or like, when I joined the Moonies and then everything was really, really great and I don't talk to my family anymore. Like,
Yeah.
That seems much more like what these books.
I'm working on a children's book to introduce children to the Zizians.
Yes.
Are those the people you meet at the final stage of Scientology when you go up on the?
Oh no, that's that like Bay Area vegan trans cult that has killed people.
Oh, we need a whole episode about that. I don't know about that. But
It's been brought up a couple of times.
Oh, I wasn't paying any attention.
It was in the pronoun episode.
Who's made a documentary about the Zizians?
I don't think anybody's made a documentary. They just started being reported on, like in the mainstream press just this year, even though they had been up to some maybe murdery shenanigans for a couple of years.
Yeah, give it about a year or two. There'll be about 5 or 6 documentaries.
Okay, but your point being, would we read a kid a book about the Zizians? Well,
all right. I want to step back a little bit now that we've had a little bit more focus on this. There is in the United States a lot of tension happening right now between local governments and state governments in California, in New York, in my state of Indiana, where the values of the state legislature are being imposed on localities. And we also look at the school board as being one of the most local areas of government. And one thing that you might say, if you're a believer in this representative democratic system, is you might say communities have a role and responsibility to govern in a way that the values of the community are channeled through the institutions. So if you have a very far left school district and what they value is indoctrinating children to believe in gendered souls, then you need some sort of philosophy of government to say, maybe to help you make the decision. Should these local school boards be able to set those types of standards? And if you say yes, then the question's answered. But then you should also, if you have any sort of philosophy, then you should also say, well, maybe in places like the Bible Belt, then including the Bible in the literature portion of school instruction, which is exactly what GLAAD and their allies are saying. Oh, this isn't sex education, this is literature. If you support that, then you should also support children being required to have biblical readings under the same pretext.
You know, in 10th grade, I had a Bible as literature class. I mean, it was an elective, but I took it.
Well, maybe in some of these communities, it could or ought to be mandatory as like non-opt out, right? So if the idea here is in these localities, these groups can set their standards so that all the children are learning about top surgery in first grade. And in these communities, everybody's learning about, Matthew and John. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we let people pick up their families and move to communities that they have greater alignment with. Or maybe if people think that inside of their own communities that things have become too extreme, maybe they try to run for local control and fix things. In this case, it's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it's really perplexing to me when these types of issues do hit the Supreme Court, because this has to raise some sort of constitutional issue. And I know in this case, it's a bit perplexing. I guess I haven't read the arguments, but I suppose it's probably a First Amendment related issue of religious liberties being violated.
And parental rights, I think, too, although I don't know if they're filing it under that, but yeah.
Yeah. It's this doesn't seem like a sustainable way. Like there's something missing in the formula for us to be able to make decisions. And if we're looking at this just as a clash of ideologies, the law is not the right mechanism to be the arbiter of choosing which ideology is correct and which one is not correct. Law has to operate within its framework. Otherwise, it doesn't really serve its purpose anymore. So I don't know. It's baffling to me. It's baffling to me.
Well, they're likely going to rule that parents can opt out. But what you're bringing up a lot of important points. One is that not only are state governments now putting their heavy hand over school boards, which have always retained a lot of local control, but then the federal government is also placing its hand over state governments, so that there are battles upon battles upon battles of who is getting control. It's like bigger and bigger forces trying to control smaller and smaller units, educational units.
Yeah.
But I think what the problem is that we should be treating gender identity as exactly the same as any other religious belief. And that way, either we continue to have separation of church and state, or we teach it as a belief, the same way I took Bible as literature in my public high school, my government high school. I interviewed a woman who had started calling these government schools, and I was like, all right, that's actually pretty useful. But, I've never argued, mostly because I think I can't win this argument in the blue bubble I live in, but I've never argued we shouldn't teach this. I certainly wish it. I have my wishes and hopes, but I don't think that I can stop them from teaching gender identity, but I can beg them to teach it as a religious belief. But I almost wonder if gender critical people, and I don't call myself that, but should also make themselves some kind of religion so they have rights, even if what they believe in is reality and facts. That clearly there are other parents who don't want their kids, besides religious people who don't want their kids exposed to these ideas. And so if those people were more organized.
Yeah, it was also an interesting facet of the case was the problem came when too many people wanted to opt out. And sorry, cat is being very active today. So the problem came when too many parents wanted to opt their children out of these like school readings of these books. And then it became the district claimed like this logistical problem. But it's really interesting that if you think of the school district as, okay, this is, our most local exercise of democracy, what does it mean if a bunch of parents want to opt out? Like, why wasn't there a reevaluation of like, okay, maybe we made a misjudgment and this isn't appropriate content, ideally for the reasons Lisa says, where it's like, if we're going to have toleration for a wide range of differences, we can't impose, quasi-religious beliefs on each other. And instead, the approach was, okay, well, if too many people want to opt out, then it's even more important that nobody be able to opt out. Which, coming from the super liberal nonprofit sector, is a very familiar kind of way of approaching dissent, I think. I remember in like the summer of 2020, my workplace, like all of the meetings kind of became cannibalized by like we would have to go around and everybody would be required to share how they were feeling. And this would take like 45 minutes out of a 1 hour meeting. And the idea was that everybody had to be forced to share their feelings so that the people who needed to share their feelings wouldn't feel like they were imposing on the people who didn't want to share their feelings.
Yeah, pronoun logic.
Yeah, the pronoun logic, where it's just like the fact that there's resistance means that you need to enforce it even more strongly.
It actually reminds me of, I think it was the first time I met you in person, Eliza, and you gave this presentation about doubt.
Yeah.
And how doubt was people who were, trans-identified or concerned about gender identity in some way were learning that if they doubted that they were transgender, that meant they were transgender.
Yeah.
Seems legit.
Will you say more about that for the people who didn't see that presentation?
Yeah, so I was presenting at GenSpect in Ireland, where I met Corey for the first time too. And I was presenting on my research, which was how kind of questions and doubts are handled in online trans communities, where a frequent line is only trans people doubt that they're transgender. Therefore, if you doubt that you're transgender, that's a really good sign that you're trans. It's, yeah, it's kind of similar in that it's like, if you resist, you need it even more than a normal person.
Yeah, if you deny you're a racist, you're definitely a racist.
Right.
Forgot about that one.
But also, if you say that you're racist, you're racist. I mean, then you just
Yeah, it's you have to be really vulnerable to be injured by that type of logic, but unfortunately a lot of people are that vulnerable.
Yeah.
But this, Corey, what you were talking about raises this issue that has really come up for me since COVID, because it's the issue of what is school for, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
we have public schools because once child labor became illegal, you needed something to do with these children all day. Well,
Yeah,
they're
these useless children.
children. If they're not going to work, we got to do something. And in theory, besides childcare, the idea would be to ready them to be cogs in the machine to some extent, unless you were super rich and you're being molded for something. I mean, you're we don't apprentice children anymore. You know, you're not going to work with dad and like learning how to, or mom, learning how to be a carpenter, etc. And in fact, you know, the liberal elite world got this really stupid idea that everybody should go to college and disinvested in vocational education, which was really very bad idea. And
Wait, what's a bad idea?
to insist that everybody should have a college education and demote vocational education, because I think college should be for those who want it. But I think if being trained, I think developing skills that will help you be employed. As the person with the degree in experimental feminist video and neo-Marxist theory, who then went to one semester of an environmental psychology PhD program.
Really?
And yeah, I went to one semester and I said, what job do I get at the end of this? And they said, consulting. And I said, oh no, what is that?
I don't want to make money.
I need a job. So then I transferred to urban planning. And then I thought, this job is going to be so boring, I'm going to die. And then I got another stupid degree. And so I have
What?
creative writing.
Hey, that came in handy. So maybe
I really used it. No, it totally worked. It worked. I went and got an MFA and I learned how to be better at this, and I got an agent. And
So I'm looking at college enrollment rates in the United States from 2012 to 2022, and it's like a rock solid line almost. You want to guess what the enrollment rate is? This is from the Department of Education statistics.
You mean more people aren't going to college?
Well, I didn't say any number. I asked, do you want to guess what the number is?
The
Is
percentage?
it like 65%?
Okay, you think 65% of high school graduates go on to college, Eliza?
Sure.
I take the under.
All right, what do you say, Lisa?
Oh, I can't just do the under. I say 42%.
Oh, wow. You're like right on the money, Lisa.
What is it?
If you said 42%, you would have hit one of these years in the last 10 years, like right on the dot. But it's almost exactly just hovering right under or over 40%.
Okay.
So I just want to, because when we say, oh, everybody's pushed to go to college, but most people don't go to college.
Yeah.
And if this is just
No.
enrollment, I don't even know, this doesn't show the graduation.
Well, so the question then of what school is for is really important, because especially with elementary schools around where I live, the point is inclusivity. And when you were saying, Corey, about like why we're reading these books, because we want them to believe in these ideas, I don't think the people pushing this agenda think I'm going to get people to believe this. They think
Yeah.
I am being a good person and spreading kindness. And
Reflecting the world as it is and not changing anything except like, yeah, that it's a kind of a denial of if it's not a belief system, you're not pushing it, you're just reflecting this positive reality that we should all live in.
Well,
That's a
the word I would use is values.
yeah.
So we're trying to indoctrinate certain values, and I would go the next step and say we ought to indoctrinate certain values. And it's
my
easy
bad.
for us to start a list of those values, because if I said at minimum tolerance of other people should be on that list, I think, you know, respect for the law maybe is another value that we should be inculcating in children. Respect for authority, maybe somewhat. The other values that we want to have children embrace: continual learning and education, like physical activity and health, right? Personal responsibility. That's why we grade them in some places,
Liberals
mostly
hate
red
that
states.
term.
What's that?
Liberals hate that term. They think that's code for several of those terms. They will interpret as code for conservative Republican.
Oh, I know it's like that now, but it wasn't always the case. But we do want
critical thinking, open
no
mindedness.
nobody actually wants that. That's
Open inquiry.
when you're taking your elective classes, Lisa. That's where the critical thinkers go, is when they're taking those elective classes, but that's not part of the base curriculum.
Well, I went to hippie government school where we could create a lot of our own curriculum, which
Yeah,
for me was
makes
like
sense.
mostly ceramics. That's all I wanted to do.
But we educate children in some very core topics, which we used to call reading and writing and arithmetic, because these are the core ways, these are the building blocks, so that if you can do these things and you have the motivation to, you can teach yourself anything else after you can read and write and do mathematics. Everything else opens up to you. Because we decided at some point that we wanted a literate workforce, and that we wanted a peaceful but sophisticated society that could include as many people as possible. And these were the bare minimums that we needed people to have in order to be able to participate in our democracy. And then shit got crazy.
Actually, I think like the majority of Western humans became literate because Martin Luther wanted them to read the Bible. That's how literacy became popularized, so they could have a personal relationship with God. But I do love the idea of doing like a kind of charrette of as many Americans as possible to see what the common values are.
Mhm.
And I would love to see gender identity beliefs handled as all other religious beliefs, so that if you really want that as part of your school, you can go to a parochial school, gender parochial school, gender Catholic school. And there's one that they're trying to form here in New York City, and like an all gender charter school that you can go to. I don't know how because I don't think if that many people are opting out who aren't religious, then it doesn't seem like it's going to be a common value to teach about the gendered soul, and that we all need to affirm a child's subjective reality.
Wait, what's the gender parochial school?
It's a
Other
school
than like a model where nobody will ever desist. Like
it's a queer, it's a school someone's trying to put together that's all queer all the time, and I will find it. It's the something May school. Sorry, it's not coming all the way up to my brain, but I'll link to it. And I imagine that 10 years ago I would have been interested in that school. But now I'm interested in a school that teaches a lot of those values Corey talked about, maybe not all of them, but and that teaches civics. It teaches how democracy in a civil society could function. Corey's driving off.
I'll be here for a few more minutes at least,
Okay,
but
well
yeah,
then we'll wrap up.
I'm in the car. I'm not going to get distracted by watching this. So if my eye line isn't staring at you guys, except at traffic lights, then that explains that. But let's keep going.
Well, I'm just thinking about how gender identity was taught to my child recently, which I think we talked about one time, but they presented a series of myths and facts. And when I read them, they were kind of the opposite. So gender identity was a fact, and it was a myth that you could change or choose your gender identity. It was a myth that it changes. But what they said to the kids was, you can disagree, just don't be mean. And the thing that's so weird about that is, and I think it's related to the Supreme Court case, how do you disagree with something that's being presented as a fact? Are you then allowed to disagree that 2 + 2 is 4, or that the earth is? And
is there, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there any way to disagree without being considered mean? I mean, that seems to have been the memo that certainly women's groups have gotten about the gender wars in the UK, especially, where it's like, it was like, oh, of course you can say all those things, but you're saying it wrong. I don't think that you can find a kid who can find a way to disagree without being considered mean with something that he's being taught as a fact.
And if the books presented to these kids are just books to read at story time and not presented as books about gender and sexuality, then parents can't opt out, because it would open the door for, well, I don't like what you're teaching about math.
Yeah.
Right? That's the argument, is if you can opt out of this, you can opt out of anything. And that's very disruptive to the government school, which is now, rather than educating your child to be a productive member of society, is just wants to make sure your child doesn't offend anyone except for bad people like us.
Yeah.
Who wrong thinkers. So how do we convince people that gender identity is a religious belief?
Corey?
How are you going to convince anybody that it's a religious belief if you don't have a good description of what a religion is? You've got to at least start there. And then when you're looking at the sort of texts that teachers are bringing into the classroom, whatever your definition of religion is, has to encompass, like, if it does not encompass those texts, then you have to agree that your objection isn't religious based. It's some other sort of objection, right? This is logically, this is one of the most difficult problems or arguments you have to try to take on.
Well, I do have a Bible here. It's called
Oh no.
the Queer Allies Bible.
Have you read this Bible?
No, it's up there on the shelf. I do try to read things that I disagree with. It is sometimes.
How many pages is it? Is it like 3 pages?
This thing?
The Queer Allies Bible?
Well, it depends what you're including. If you're including the glossary, it's 249 pages.
So it must not have all the gender identities.
Let's see. Gender identity is the internal sense of being male, female, both, neither, or other genders. So the gender identity is a sense of your gender, which is really, really hard to understand. And guess what gender is? Not in here. No definition of gender. So,
Hey, God is hard to define too. It reminds me of my favorite thing to come out of the UK gender wars, which was the pangender FOIA request from, I think, the University of Sussex, where the school, the poor person who had to respond to this was like, we can't give you a whole list because it includes unknown genders.
yet to be excavated.
Yeah, it was like this, I think, if I'm remembering right, and this wasn't something silly somebody said about it on top of the silly response, it was like the whole galaxy of like genders known and unknown and discovered and undiscovered, and truly an amazing thing for someone who, for an administrator to have to write.
Well, this brings up another point about the Supreme Court case.
Yeah.
We're talking about what kids learn at school, but these kids are all carrying around these powerful computers in their pockets that, well, maybe not after John Haidt's Anxious Generation book, but for the past few years, these kids have access to the entire universe of information.
Yeah.
And are often the ones schooling their parents about whatever pangender is and raccoon gender and gender fuck. Some of my favorite identities. So why does it matter so much what they get from the school? How is it different when the likelihood is that the parents are not able to control what they have access to? Is the issue that by having it at school, it's completely sanctioned as opposed to you went to a website and learned something?
Yeah, I think something that's taught to kids as a fact at school is very different from literally anything you can think of. You can find something false about it on the internet.
Well, I think it's also designed to sever like the identity of a student, right? So you're a child, you go to school, your identity in that space is that you are a student. I think it's designed to sever that school-centric identity from the family-centric identity, and to create that tension, pushing a child to align more towards the school-centric identity instead of the family-centric identity.
Yeah. And I've had so many experiences where one year a teacher was hired 2 days before school who was clearly not ready, had no experience. Some parents, including me, were quite worried about it. And it turns out that the principal and the school, the parent liaison, they got all the kids together and questioned them. What have your parents been saying? What are your parents telling you? And then they called the parents in and said, you're turning your child against the teacher and you're all bad people and have not been welcoming. And you are all racists. That was maybe, I think, the first time I got called a racist 3 times in school settings. So that was one of them. And there is a lot of that, like being willing to come between, in fact,
Yeah.
taking it as your mission to come between kids and their parents, which I just find terrifying because it's already a really strange thing to have a teenager. Because I mean, I'm sure some of them don't change personalities.
Yeah.
The thought of anybody making this period of time when children are supposed to be differentiating slowly from their parents and declaring their from their parents and declaring their independence and playing with that, and they go out and they come back to you, and the idea of someone just like severing that and getting in the way is very frightening to me. And I definitely don't think it's the role of the school. It's a little bit more like Scientology, where the kids get shipped off to those boat schools and told never to talk to their parents, and they the disruptive forces, or the whatever they call them, the people who disagree, that's how parents get treated. So basically it's
Yeah.
public school Scientology.
Well, I can think of another example, Lisa.
What?
Uh,
Yeah.
150 years ago or so, as we were moving more into the modern period in the United States, there was a movement to let's quote unquote educate the children of American Indians,
Oh yeah.
and to instill them with American identities instead of their tribal identities. And there was a very deliberate effort. Again, not 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 by people that were trying to inflict evil in the world, but they wanted to civilize the savages. And basically what we're seeing with these types of fights of trying to teach inclusion and diversity, it is the same model of trying to civilize the savages. And the savages today are the ones who instill biblical values in their children, and who question the principles of inclusion and diversity. That's the savage man. We're taking their children and trying to educate them. And the context is different, but the mindset is stable.
It's such a good point that the people objecting to this indoctrination are descendants of the same kinds of people who indoctrinated the Native Americans, and now we're a bunch of savages.
I think that's the episode title. We're a bunch of savages.
Okay. Well, on that note, any last thoughts about this before we go, or anything else?
Non-gender thing. Anybody? I have to think of one.
I had so many.
So one of my habits is that I like to buy board games for my friends. If I really, really like a board game, I will try to get a board game into their fingers somehow, someday, because board games are awesome. I was introduced to an excellent board game last year called Harmonies.
Okay.
And I gave that to our friend Grace, and it's been a huge hit. So I recommend the board game Harmonies. It is something that is delightful for children and adults to play. It has enough complexity that your decisions really, like you're definitely the decision maker in the game. But the rule system is so easy that you can teach it in about 15 minutes. So
Okay.
That's my non-gender thing, the Harmonies board game. Ages 8 and up, easy.
Okay.
Well,
That-
Grace, if
that
you're
sounds-
listening, I'd like to be invited over to play the game.
Yeah.
And next time Corey comes to town, I'll play the game.
Definitely.
Yeah, we still need to do our New York City meetup that we had been planning, and then Ben was on his book retreat. Let's see, my non-gender thing is related to last week's because I'm still reading the book about the Victorian marriages, Parallel Lives by Phyllis Rose. But now that I'm in the chapter about John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor and
Oh,
Harriet Taylor's suffering husband, I really, 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 really want to stage a dramatic reading of their correspondence, particularly the three of them, also the letters that Mill and Harriet Taylor send to other people about their relationship, and to have them be played by like 40-something Bay Area rationalist, polyamorous poly people. And I think it would be amazing.
I'll go to it.
Because they're so insufferable. Oh my God. Yeah, that's what I want.
I support that. Mine is one of my favorite things that came out of the pandemic was the Bo Burnham Netflix special and album called Inside. And
Okay.
I love it so
Not really
much.
escapist.
What's that?
Not really escapist
Well, it
by the
was
title.
one of the great pieces of art about the pandemic made during the pandemic. But
Okay.
there is a Phoebe Bridgers cover of one of the songs that my daughter played me because she's really into Phoebe Bridgers, and I really love this Bo Burnham album. And she said, "Oh, they're dating," and Phoebe Bridgers covered his song called "That Funny Feeling." So I recommend that. And
Okay.
I hope some other people put their non-gender recommendations in the comments, because there's a whole
Yeah, we don't get those very often, but we need them too. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for listening. And we will catch you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.